Over the next few months, the pressure became less subtle. His responsibilities became more ambiguous, not eliminated, but softened at the edges in ways that made it difficult to point to any single thing and say, this is wrong. Decisions he used to own were now validated by OptiCore before implementation. When his assessment aligned with the system's recommendation, nothing was said. When it diverged, he was asked to document his reasoning, not for operational purposes, but in a way that created a record of his divergence. A paper trail of disagreements between Marcus Hale and the machine. A paper trail that told one story if you read it one way: stubborn, resistant, out of step. New performance checkpoints were introduced, monthly now rather than quarterly. Each one facilitated by Linda from HR, who asked questions that were professionally neutral and geometrically precise. How do you feel you're adapting to the new workflow? Have you been utilizing the OptiCore decision support features consistently? Are there areas where you feel you need additional training? Additional training. Marcus was 55 years old and had trained everyone in the building. He answered every question politely. He kept his responses measured. He gave them nothing inflammatory, nothing that could be cited, nothing that sounded like an employee who was difficult or defeated. Then came the coaching plan. It arrived in October via email from Linda, with Daniel CC'd, and a subject line that read, Professional Development Partnership Agreement, Marcus Hale. Just a formality, Linda said in a follow-up meeting that same afternoon. The company uses these for all transitions involving significant workflow evolution. Designed to support your transition, she added. Transition. Marcus took the document home that evening. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had studied for certifications in his 30s, where he had reviewed incident reports on Saturday mornings, where Renata had once fallen asleep waiting for him to finish one more thing. And he read every line. It was 42 pages. He read all 42 pages. The coaching plan identified 8 specific development areas, each tied to an OptiCore metric. Each area had a 30-day target, a 60-day target, and a 90-day target. The targets were phrased in language that sounded objective, but was, upon examination, entirely subjective. Demonstrate consistent alignment with automated decision frameworks. Reduce friction in cross-functional technology adoption discussions. Exhibit measurable improvement in digital native collaboration practices. None of these had clear pass-fail criteria. All of them could be graded any way HR chose. This was not a performance improvement plan. It was a scaffold, a way to construct a documented record that Marcus Hale had been given every opportunity to adapt and had fallen short. A way to make what was coming look like a consequence rather than a decision. A termination that would read, in every legal document that followed, as the employee's failure rather than the company's design. Marcus closed the document. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Renata found him there at 11:30. She sat down across from him without asking what was wrong, because after 30 years of marriage, she could read him the way he read systems. She just sat with him. How bad? She asked finally. They're going to try to push me out before the pension vests. She was quiet for a moment. Are you sure? I've been watching it build for 8 months. The dashboard, the new hires, the org changes, the review, this coaching plan. It's a sequence. I just didn't want to see it that way. Renata reached across the table and put her hand on his. What are you going to do? Marcus looked at his laptop. The same thing I always do, he said. He started documenting. Not the way they expected him to document, not in the format their systems preferred, not in ways that fed into OptiCore's data architecture, not in any form that would pass through the company's servers and become their property. He documented the way a man documents when he knows the document might someday be read by someone who is trying to determine what actually happened. He bought a separate external hard drive. He set up a personal email account through a service he'd never used for work. He was meticulous about what he documented and how, not because he was planning litigation immediately, but because he understood, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who had watched companies make decisions for nearly 3 decades, that data was the only language institutions truly respected. He tracked discrepancies between OptiCore's recommendations and actual operational outcomes, building a spreadsheet with timestamps, recommendation IDs, outcome data, and the delta between projected improvement and measured result. In the 8 months between March and October, OptiCore had recommended actions that resulted in measurable operational degradation on 23 separate occasions. 6 of those occasions had caused significant service disruptions. 2 had required emergency human intervention. All of it had been quietly resolved, patched, written off as calibration issues, and never surfaced to senior leadership. He logged incidents where automation caused delays, errors, or failures, particularly the ones that had been caught and corrected by Marcus himself or by team members following Marcus's informal guidance, before they escalated into reportable events. He cataloged these with the dry precision of a man who understood that the most important thing about evidence was its specificity. Dates, times, system states, the exact sequence of events, the names of the people involved. He recorded how often the younger staff deferred to him despite the tools, not out of disloyalty to OptiCore, but because they were not yet entirely convinced that a software recommendation was a substitute for 30 seconds of conversation with someone who had seen this exact situation 17 times before. And then carefully, with attention to what was legally permissible in his jurisdiction, consulting briefly and confidentially with a friend who had a labor law practice, he began to archive internal communications. Emails sent to his company account which he was legally entitled to retain. Slack messages from channels in which he was a participant. Strategy documents distributed to him in his capacity as senior operations manager. Meeting notes from sessions he had attended. He was not accessing anything he wasn't entitled to access. He was not taking anything that had been restricted from him. He was simply preserving what he had received in the normal course of his work. What he found when he laid it all out, when he printed certain documents and spread them across the kitchen table on a Saturday evening while Renata read in the next room, was not subtle. There was an email chain from January between Daniel, the new VP of Automation Strategy, and an executive Marcus had never met named Garrett Ford, with a subject line that read, Q4 Workforce Optimization Review. In that chain, Ford had written, "We need to be deliberate about legacy personnel costs. The OptiCore rollout gives us the framework to make those moves defensively. Let's target the 5-year to vesting window specifically. Those are the highest cost departures if they go on their own terms." There was a slide deck from the February strategy retreat with a section titled Accelerated Retirement Pathway that outlined a process, described in entirely neutral language about supportive transitions and phased reductions that matched, point for point, the sequence Marcus had been experiencing. There was an internal projection document from the finance team showing that the company stood to save approximately $4.2 million annually if it could reduce headcount by 12% among employees in the 52 to 62 age range before those employees' pensions fully vested. Marcus read that last document 3 times. $4.2 million. He thought about the plaque in the box. He thought about the promotion that went to someone younger, twice. He thought about Renata falling asleep on the couch. He thought about the coaching plan with its 42 pages of deliberately vague language about digital native collaboration practices. He thought about Daniel saying, "Experience can create bias," with the flat calm of someone who had been told to say it. Then he closed the documents, backed everything up to 2 separate external drives, and made a decision. He was not going to panic. He was not going to confront anyone. He was not going to hire an attorney yet, not until the moment was right. He was not going to give them anything that looked like resistance or instability or the behavior of a man who couldn't adapt. He was going to wait. And while he waited, he was going to make himself more valuable, not less. He leaned into the coaching plan. Not cynically, not in a way that was entirely performance, but with the genuine professionalism of a man who understood that the best way to expose a corrupt process was to satisfy every stated requirement and make it impossible to claim later that the outcome was about performance. He completed every target on the coaching plan's 30-day checklist, then the 60-day. He submitted documentation of his completion in formats that were thorough, time-stamped, and impossible to misread. When OptiCore recommendations aligned with his own judgment, he approved them with notes indicating his concurrence and reasoning. When they didn't, he submitted formal written analyses that were measured in tone and meticulous in detail, always framing his concerns as contributions to system improvement rather than objections to automation. He attended every alignment session with his full attention and said nothing that wasn't precise and professional. He trained 2 more junior staff members completely, generously, holding back nothing, and he documented that he had done so. He became, on paper, the model of an employee adapting successfully to a new technological landscape. Linda from HR told him in November that she was encouraged by his trajectory. He thanked her warmly. Daniel told him in December that the coaching plan was being transitioned to a development framework, which Marcus understood to mean that it would remain as a document but would no longer require monthly reviews, a small retreat that confirmed they were watching the lawsuit exposure. Marcus smiled and said he appreciated the vote of confidence. He was building a wall, one brick at a time, making it impossible for them to say, later, that he had failed to meet any standard they had set, making it impossible for them to claim that what was about to happen, whatever form it took, was anything other than what it was. Meanwhile, he was also talking to people, not loudly, not organizationally. But Marcus had, over 27 years, accumulated a network the way sediment accumulates, gradually, quietly, and with considerable depth. He knew people in legal. He knew people in finance. He knew the woman who had been the executive assistant to 3 successive CEOs and who knew, as a consequence, where the bodies were buried in the most purely metaphorical sense. Her name was Gloria, and she had worked at the company for 31 years, and she had the careful, watchful quality of someone who had long ago decided that the most powerful position in any organization was the one people overlooked. Gloria and Marcus had coffee together approximately once a month. They had done this for 9 years. They talked about their work in the abstract way of people who understood they were speaking in a place where walls had ears, but they understood each other well enough that the abstractions were translucent. "They're running the same play in finance," she told him one afternoon in November. "Janice Morales, 53, 31 years, 18 months from her pension vesting. They put her on a performance plan in September." Marcus absorbed this. "Is she aware of what it actually is?" "She is now," Gloria said. "I had coffee with her 2 weeks ago." They looked at each other. "How many?" Marcus asked. Gloria wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "That I know about? 6. That I suspect? Closer to 14. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Is anyone else keeping records?" "Janice has some things. Robert Chin in IT, 49, 22 years, stock vesting issue. Not pension, but similar. He's been paying attention." "They should be more careful," Marcus said. "I told them." He nodded slowly. "And more thorough." Gloria looked at him. "Do you have something?" He considered the question carefully. "I have enough," he said, "to make a conversation very uncomfortable." She nodded once. The conversation moved to other things. But something had been established. January came. Then February. The coaching plan had been, technically, completed. The alignment sessions continued but decreased in frequency. Marcus began to wonder how they would move. He had been watching the company's approach long enough to understand that they preferred engineered exits to confrontations. They would want him to leave of his own accord, ideally convinced that it was his idea, ideally signing documents before he thought too carefully about what they contained. He was prepared for several possible approaches. They took the one he had considered least likely, which was also, in retrospect, the most characteristic: a reorganization.
In the last week of February, the company announced a strategic structural realignment that would consolidate 4 operational departments into 2. It was presented in a company-wide email from Garrett Ford as a bold step toward operational excellence. It included the phrase, right-sizing for the future, which Marcus had always found to be one of the more honest pieces of corporate language, precisely because of how much it revealed about how companies thought about people, as sizes to be adjusted rather than individuals to be reckoned with. In this reorganization, Marcus's role as senior operations manager was eliminated. He was offered a lateral transfer to a new position, operational continuity specialist.
Lower visibility, narrower scope, same title level technically, but a position that had been created, Marcus could see clearly, to last approximately as long as it needed to before being eliminated in a follow-up efficiency review. It was an offer designed to be refused. He accepted it. Linda from HR looked genuinely surprised when he said yes. He smiled at her and said he was committed to supporting the organization's evolution. He had bought himself time. And time, right now, was what he needed, because Janice Morales' attorney had requested an initial consultation. Robert Chen had been documenting a pattern of selective enforcement in his department's performance management process, and Gloria had, quietly and without attribution, provided Marcus with a copy of an internal HR compliance review from 2019 that had flagged, and then been ignored, the company's de facto policy of managing older employees out before pension events. That document alone was interesting, not explosive, not a smoking gun in the classic sense, but it established something important. The company had known, at least partially, what was happening and had chosen not to act. That was a different kind of liability than ignorance. Marcus had been talking, once, to a senior attorney at an employment law firm in the city. He had not retained her. He had presented his situation in the hypothetical register. "I'm asking on behalf of a friend," was the conventional fiction. And she had listened with the focused attention of someone assessing opportunity. "The Age Discrimination in Employment Act covers employees over 40, she said, but pattern evidence is what moves these cases. Individual incidents can be explained away. But if you can show a systematic practice of targeting employees in a specific age and tenure bracket, timed around pension vesting events, documented in internal communications, that's a different conversation." "And if the documents exist?" Marcus had asked. She had looked at him with a slight smile of someone who had stopped pretending the hypothetical was hypothetical. "Then," she said, "we talk about what the conversation is worth." He had thanked her and left without committing to anything. He was not sure, even now, that he wanted litigation. Litigation was slow. It was expensive. It was public in ways that could follow you. It required, ultimately, putting your own story in someone else's hands and trusting a process that was designed to be adversarial. What Marcus wanted was simpler and more immediate. He wanted to vest his pension. He wanted to leave on terms that acknowledged what he had actually contributed. He wanted the number on the exit agreement to reflect what he was actually worth, not what they thought they could get away with. The meeting request came in the last week of March. Subject line, career path discussion. Requested by Linda from HR. Daniel was listed as an attendee. There was a name Marcus didn't recognize, Garrett Ford's executive assistant, which meant Ford himself would likely be present or on the line. Marcus looked at the calendar notification for a long moment. He had been waiting for this. He went home that evening and reviewed everything he had. Not all of it. He didn't need all of it for this meeting. He selected carefully. The first goal was not to overwhelm. The first goal was to change the nature of the conversation. You didn't do that by laying everything on the table at once. You did it by making it clear that there was more to lay. He printed a selection of documents, not the most damaging ones, the ones that were most unambiguous, clearest in their intent, easiest to understand, hardest to explain away. He organized them into a folder, not a thick one, not theatrical, just a standard manila folder, the kind used for routine paperwork, which was itself a kind of statement. He also, that evening, sent an email to Janice Morales' attorney, not committing to anything, just opening a channel.
letting it be known that his situation was connected to hers, that there might be a pattern worth discussing. He slept well that night. He drove to the office the next morning in the March light, which was early spring light, pale and clear, the kind that makes the familiar unfamiliar in a way that feels like possibility. He wore his best suit. He brought the folder. The meeting was in Conference Room A on the 4th floor, the large one with windows that looked out over the atrium. Marcus arrived early, as he always did, and sat with his hands folded on the table and waited. They filed in. Daniel, wearing the expression of a man who had been told what his role was in this meeting and had rehearsed it. Linda, in a gray blazer, with a legal pad already open to a fresh page, pen in hand. Christopher from HR, who was there, Marcus suspected, to serve as a witness and to fill the role of secondary presence in case something needed to be confirmed or denied later. And a man Marcus had never met face to face. Older, 60s, silver-haired, with the careful stillness of someone accustomed to rooms where decisions were made. This was not Garrett Ford. This was someone from Garrett Ford's world, sent to represent the executive layer without exposing it directly. A clean pair of hands. They made introductions. They used words like appreciate and thoughtful and valued contribution. The silver-haired man, who introduced himself only as James from the executive team, spoke in the measured cadence of someone who had made difficult things seem ordinary for a long time. Marcus, James said after the preamble, the company is enormously grateful for your 27 years. The work you've done to build this organization's operational infrastructure is genuinely foundational.
We don't say that to be polite. It's simply true. Marcus said nothing. He waited. As you know, the current restructuring has created some significant shifts in our operational model, and we want to make sure that as we navigate those shifts, we're doing right by our people, especially those who have given so much. Marcus waited. The company would like to offer you a transition package, James said. We believe it's generous, and we've structured it to recognize your contribution. Daniel slid a document across the table. Marcus did not pick it up immediately. James continued. 18-month salary. Healthcare continuation through the end of next year. A consulting engagement, renewable quarterly, at the company's discretion, that would allow you to remain connected to operational initiatives in an advisory capacity.
Marcus looked at the document. He did not pick it up. He said, all contingent on signing a release. James nodded smoothly. Standard practice in transition situations. Marcus nodded slowly, as if considering this. He let the silence sit for exactly long enough to make everyone in the room aware that it was sitting there. Then he reached into his bag. He placed the folder on the table. Linda's pen stopped moving. The folder sat there. Marcus did not open it immediately. I appreciate the offer, he said. Before I make a decision, I'd like to give you an opportunity to review some materials I've been compiling. He opened the folder. He laid out 4 documents, face up, in a line. The first was a printed summary, 1 page, cleanly formatted, of the email chain from January, in which Garrett Ford had explicitly tied the OptiCore rollout to the targeting of employees within 5 years of pension vesting. The second was a 2-page analysis Marcus had prepared himself, a timeline showing the sequence of actions taken against him, cross-referenced with the actions taken against Janice Morales, Robert Chen, and 3 other employees Marcus had identified through his conversations with Gloria. The pattern was not ambiguous. The timing around vesting dates was precise. The third was a copy of the 2019 Internal Compliance Review that had identified early indicators of the practice and been shelved. The fourth was a single page from the finance projection document. Just the page, just the relevant paragraph, just the number $4.2 million, and the methodology that produced it, which made unambiguous the direct financial motive for what had been done to Marcus and people like him. He did not say, "This is evidence." He did not say, "I have an attorney." He did not make threats or accusations. He simply placed the documents on the table and waited. James looked at the documents without touching them.
His face did not change in the theatrical way that faces change in films. He did not blanch or recoil. He was a professional. He had been in difficult rooms before. But something shifted in him. Something in the calculation behind his eyes. Some rapid and silent reassessment of what this conversation now was and what it could become. Linda had stopped writing entirely. Daniel was looking at a spot on the table approximately 6 inches to the left of the documents. "What exactly," James said carefully, "are you proposing?" Marcus looked at him with the calm of a man who had spent months preparing for this moment and had therefore already arrived at whatever feelings it was going to produce.
"I'm proposing," Marcus said, "that we revisit the package." There was a pause. "Specifically," Marcus continued, "I'm proposing that the pension vest immediately. That the payout be structured to reflect not 18 months' salary, but a figure that appropriately reflects the cost to the company of what is in these documents becoming part of a more public conversation. I'm proposing a formal consulting engagement on terms I will specify, not terms the company will specify. And I'm proposing that the company conduct an internal audit of its workforce transition practices with external oversight and a meaningful reporting requirement. I'm also," Marcus said quietly, "not the only person with documents." The room was very still. James said, "Give us a moment." He and Linda stepped out. Christopher remained at the table, very carefully not making eye contact with Marcus or with Daniel. Daniel sat with his hands flat on the table and stared at the window. Marcus sat quietly. He was not anxious. He was not triumphant. He was something closer to settled, the feeling of a man who has done the work and arrived at the place the work was meant to bring him. They were gone for 11 minutes. When they came back, James sat down and placed his own folder on the table. "There are some adjustments we'd like to discuss," he said. The negotiation took 4 days. Not in that room, in a series of calls between Marcus's attorney. He had retained her the previous week, finally, definitively. And the company's outside counsel, a firm Marcus had never heard of that specialized, its website indicated, in employment relations and workforce transition strategy, which was itself an interesting phrase. The company pushed back on several points. They claimed the documents were ambiguous. Marcus's attorney said they were not and cited 3 comparable cases by name. The company said the other employees' situations were unrelated. Marcus's attorney said a pattern by definition required multiple data points and that they had considerably more than the minimum. The company asked what it would take to resolve the matter. Marcus's attorney told them. They made a counteroffer. It was not adequate. Marcus said no. They made another counteroffer. It was closer. Marcus said no. 4 days after that first meeting, they accepted his terms. Full pension vesting, immediate and unconditional. A payout of 32 months' salary, not the 18 they had offered, not the number they had wanted, but the number that reflected what Marcus had actually cost them and what he had actually been worth. A consulting agreement for 3 years at a day rate Marcus had specified for projects Marcus would select with a 60-day notice requirement for termination. And the internal audit, not with external oversight as Marcus had originally proposed, but with a third-party HR compliance firm, which was close enough and legally cleaner. There was also, at Marcus's insistence, a side agreement, not part of the main documents, in which the company acknowledged, in language carefully drafted by his attorney, to be undeniable in its meaning, but not admissible as an admission of liability, that certain workforce management practices were being reviewed and revised. It was not a confession, but it was a record. Marcus signed on a Thursday afternoon in April, 2 years and 11 months after he had first seen the OptiCore dashboard and its forecast of 36 months. He had beaten their timeline by 1 month. He sat in his attorney's office afterward for a while, in a chair by the window, while she processed paperwork. He wasn't sure what he felt. Not elation. That would have required a kind of emotional energy he hadn't been carrying. Not grief exactly, though there was something in the vicinity of it. He had given 27 years to that building, and it had tried, carefully and deliberately and with considerable institutional sophistication, to rob him. He had stopped it. But you didn't feel heroic about stopping something that shouldn't have started. He felt, mostly, finished. His last day at the office was quiet. He had not announced it widely. He arrived at his normal time, cleared his desk with the systematic efficiency of a man who had always kept things orderly, answered a few emails, and drank a cup of coffee at his standing desk while looking out the window at the city below.
The younger employees came by. Priya, Joel, a handful of others. Some of them knew, in the vague organizational gossip way, that he was leaving. None of them knew why. They stood around his desk with the slightly uneasy energy of people who understood that something significant was happening but couldn't entirely name it. Priya said, "You've been the most helpful person here. I don't know how we're going to manage without you." She meant it genuinely, and Marcus received it that way. "You'll figure it out," he said, "and when you don't, you'll know to look at the data before you trust the recommendation." She looked at him for a moment, and he thought she understood more than she was saying. He shook hands with Daniel, who held the handshake a moment longer than necessary and said, "I hope you know and then stopped. Marcus waited. Daniel did not finish the sentence. "Take care of yourself," Marcus said. He collected his box and walked to the elevator and pressed L for lobby. And when the doors opened and he walked through the atrium and out the main entrance into the April afternoon, he did not look back. The world outside was ordinary and specific and very good. Traffic, pigeons, a food cart releasing a cloud of steam into the cold air. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just standing, breathing, letting his body understand that the hallway was done and he was through the door. He went home. He sat with Renata on the back porch and they drank tea, and he told her everything, all of it, the part she hadn't known, and she listened the way she always listened, completely, without rushing him toward a conclusion. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I'm proud of you. Not for winning, just for being the kind of person who documented carefully and waited and didn't become bitter in the process." He slept better than he had in a year. The months that followed were not dramatic. He consulted on 2 projects for companies he found through his network, not the old company, not yet. He read. He cooked things that required attention. He went for long walks in the morning. He called Gloria occasionally, and she told him that the internal audit had, in fact, resulted in several policy changes, and that at least 2 other employees had received revised exit terms after pointing, in their own negotiations, to the pattern Marcus had documented. He did not take credit for this. He did not need to. He and Renata drove up the coast for 2 weeks in June. He did not check his email with any urgency. The water was cold and the light was long, and in the evenings they sat on the deck of a rented cottage and watched the sun go down over the Pacific, and Marcus thought about how many years he had been too busy to do exactly this, and what those years had bought him, and what they had cost. He had answers to both questions. He held them without bitterness. The math had been worth it, not because the company had deserved his loyalty, but because the work itself had been real, and the skills he had built had been real, and the people he had helped had been real. Those things existed independent of what the company had tried to do. You could not retroactively corrupt the value of a thing by revealing the bad faith of the institution that housed it. He was thinking about this, abstractly, one late September afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table, his kitchen table, the old one, the one that had held certification textbooks and incident reports and the 42-page coaching plan, when his phone rang. He looked at the number. It was a 212 area code he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was from a young man named Tyler who identified himself as a junior operations manager at his old company. Tyler's voice had the careful professionalism of someone who had been told to make a call and was not entirely sure what he was doing, but was going to see it through. "Mr. Hale, I'm sorry to bother you. I got your number from, well, I'd rather explain in person. The short version is that we're having some significant issues with the OptiCore system. It's not performing the way leadership expected, and there are some patterns in the failure data that I think require someone with your level of experience to interpret. We were wondering if you might be open to a consulting engagement. Marcus listened to the voicemail twice. He sat with it. The OptiCore system was failing in ways leadership hadn't anticipated. He almost smiled. Not unkindly, just with the private recognition of a man who had known this would happen because he had seen the architecture and understood its limits and had documented those limits in 37 separate communications over 18 months, all of which had been dismissed or ignored or overridden by a software recommendation that carried the authority of something that appeared objective. He called Tyler back.
Tyler answered on the second ring. "Mr. Hale, thank you for returning my call." "Marcus is fine," he said. "Tell me about the failure patterns." Tyler told him. It took 20 minutes. The story was not surprising. It was, in its broad outlines, the story Marcus had predicted to Daniel twice and to 3 successive oversight meetings. The system had been calibrated on historical data that did not adequately represent peak operational conditions. It had been deployed without a parallel testing period of sufficient duration. The handoff from human judgment to automated recommendation had been treated as a switch rather than a gradient, and the institutional knowledge that should have served as a corrective had been systematically removed or marginalized before the system was stable enough to operate without it. They were, in other words, experiencing the consequences of exactly what Marcus had tried to prevent. "I can help," Marcus said. That's wonderful to hear," Tyler said, with the relief of someone who had been told the surgeon was available. "What would you need in terms of—" "My current rate," Marcus said, "is $450 per hour, with a 10-hour weekly minimum and a 6-month engagement floor. I'll also need complete access to the system architecture documentation, the full incident log going back to deployment, and a direct reporting line to someone with actual decision-making authority. Not coordination authority, decision-making authority." A pause. "I'll have to confirm the budget," Tyler said carefully. "Of course," Marcus said. "Take your time." "Could I ask, is that rate negotiable?" Marcus looked out the window. September light cut across the kitchen floor, long and warm and without urgency. "No," he said pleasantly. They called back the next morning. They agreed to his terms. He began the following Monday. He drove to the office, his old office, the building he had walked out of 5 months before, and rode the elevator to the 4th floor and was escorted to a conference room where 8 people were waiting to listen to him explain what had gone wrong and how to fix it. Some of them he recognized. Some of them were new. All of them had the expression of people who have discovered, too late and at some cost, the difference between knowing how a system is supposed to work and knowing how it actually works. He opened his laptop. He looked around the room. "All right," he said. "Let's start at the beginning.